it's
Sure.
okay.
It's
It all worked out fine.
That wasn't chapel.
Yeah. Well, and the longer that you sing, like I'm the opposite. The longer I sing low, the more my low goes away. But for you, the more you sing high, the more your high goes away. I get it. I get it. It is in the records.
Is that even the right word?
Yeah. Tis.
I felt like I was actually sounded like that.
Oh my goodness, Angela.
Elise, I think I'm gonna cry. I don't know. I feel it.
Oh, I cried twice yesterday.
I know. See, I only cried once yesterday. So
Yeah, because I was every rough day.
Don't cry today.
We're not gonna do this.
Don't cry today. Don't cry.
Well, Angela, you're not the only reason I cried yesterday.
Don't feel special.
Oh,
Don't feel special. You're not me.
it's so dumb.
It is. It's dumb, but it's like it's your anger is justified.
Okay.
I feel like.
I'm listening.
Oh, it's so dumb.
Tell
What
me.
was it, Monday?
It was Monday.
Monday. We're in journalism. And I'm in journalism basically just to do the yearbook. So Miss Hinton, like, she said, okay, there's this box and it needs to go to the post office. Annabelle, why don't we take it? I'm like, Annabelle and me both said, I'll take it. It's 3 o'clock. We're going to take the box. Okay, we're going to leave 15
At least
minutes.
you need to go to the post office anyways.
Actually, I just wanted to go.
I thought you needed to go to Valentine's.
Right.
Oh, well, then, no, okay. Well, never mind.
No, but my reason was, let me go so I can go early for swim. That was my reason. And Annabelle was like, no, let me go out of the headache. And I said, no, I'm going.
Okay.
And I took the box.
Yeah.
And Annabelle looks at me and goes, if you do this, I'm going to be mad at you for a few days.
Yeah.
Why?
Because I went and she did. And she
To the
called,
post office.
She called dibs.
To the post office
So then,
with a box.
so then I get there and
Really?
she sends me pictures of her face on Snapchat and says, you're the worst. I can't believe you did this. You didn't even ask. So rude. And I was like, so I called my mom and yelled. And then I went to the post office. Flash forward to the next day. I knew she told Grace. I knew she was going to tell Grace. I was like, Grace, she's being ridiculous, right? And Grace was like,
Stupid.
I was like, she's being ridiculous, right? And Grace was like, well, I mean, you did do that to her.
Did what? What? Went to the post
You know
office.
what? And then I
Said it at the same time.
And then I'm like, okay, Claudia doesn't know the story yet. She'll think she's ridiculous. Because I actually need someone to validate.
Uh-huh.
And Claudia was like,
I will validate you.
Claudia was like, yeah, that was rude. I can't believe you did that. Annabelle's already gotten to her and told her already. So I'm like sitting there.
Callie! Where's Callie?
I didn't even know. She was like, I can't even do this anymore. So then I went home during seventh period. The seventh period is just me and Annabelle. And I was like, I can't do it today. So I went home and was talking to mom about it and we were so angry about it. Because I angry cried.
Well, I also angry cried and then I sad cried.
But then I also just
And then I just
cried.
Then I just cried.
Cried for the sake of crying.
And
Makes
then
me
I
feel better.
cried just looking at Suey. I was like, oh.
He's just so old.
That's so funny.
I remember, like, I think I remember when you got Stewie.
But yeah.
I validate you.
Didn't happen.
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous.
Like part of me's like, we should talk about this and discuss to Annabelle why it made me so upset. But the nurse was like, we should just forget about it forever.
Hey Connor.
Never bring it up again because
You got everything on already last week.
I might have to go back and like,
We're living right here.
But we both like,
Those-
I just said, let me do it. It was 15
And
minutes.
did you say, really like to go to swim a little bit early?
Yeah.
Because it would help me out a little bit to get there a little early.
Is it good enough to do this kind of swim stuff this early in the year because it's not spring?
We
Well,
swam
I swim
in
inside.
indoors.
Indoor pool,
And
not outdoor.
you mean at the SVU area? Because I've been there.
Yes, they do.
Angela, what were the girls' reactions?
Okay,
when
I'm
Zach
done talking about it.
I just can't
told
hold a
them
grudge.
to-
I can't hold a grudge that
They
long.
did what I thought they were gonna do.
I turned off the
Aria,
light.
was more excited for the idea of an adventure.
Like going to Missouri?
Yeah, just, because she often on, like, randomly will say, wonder what it would be like to try a new school, or I wonder what it'd be like to buy a house.
No new school for me.
And then, Noelle immediately melted down.
Me too.
Tears?
And, yeah, she cried, and I don't want to leave Kaylee. She loves
Aw.
Kaylee Gilmer. Like, she's her best friend.
And
And by the time by the time we leave, it'll be flip-flopped. Noelle will be prepared, and she'll be okay, and Nana will be like,
Yeah.
What
it'll
about,
flip-flop, and
what about
baby's
Brooke?
just like,
She doesn't even, she's
whatever,
like, okay.
she don't care.
She's not gonna go recognize.
No,
Yeah,
she's
she's
gonna
gonna
go,
go.
yeah. She's gonna.
Yeah, Sayla's
Like,
actually the most
like-
emotional of the four about it.
She cries every day.
Who cried every day?
No, you know what she has done for the past 2 days straight? Push down her bullies. Like, she's the only girl in there yet. She walks around and she'll get right up to him and put her hands on his shoulders and push him down.
Oh my gosh!
Make him sit on their bottom.
She's established.
I like
Yes, she
Mom in-
is.
Mom in the making.
Something. I had a female Henry Roar. That is good.
I can't remember.
Oh my word. Like I watched her do it to Elliot when I first walked in
Elliot!
yesterday. I love that
I
baby.
love him.
I love my
That's the only
Elliot.
reason I cry, cute babies.
And then today when I got there, the dimples. I can't deal.
I mean, like,
Like I
I
told Marina, I'm gonna need for you to like sign an agreement for them to marry you because
apparently Avalon and
Yeah,
Elliot are
no, I'm
betrothed.
No, definitely
No.
Sayla. Elliot couldn't be a
Sarah
Hardy.
wins that one.
Elliot couldn't be a Hardy.
Oh man,
Yeah.
With my disability, I had to have someone with the same disorder.
she's so pretty.
I knew she was really pretty baby because I was like, Mackenzie's so pretty.
Yeah.
I didn't know Mackenzie was really pretty.
But
But just
as a little girl, she was
11-year-old, she's so cute.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Elliot's really
My
She is
favorite,
sassy
my
thing,
favorite
though.
is Wyatt he goes, that girl that was shirtless, she'll put no one.
She would
That
be
girl-
excellent Moana.
I had never like, so I hear someone talking about the 8th graders, and I was like, after your grade, I just don't know who else there is, like, in
Your
your, like,
kids?
at your school.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I just know your class.
Well, and like,
And he was telling me some names, and I was like, oh, I do know those kids. But how do we remember them? Like,
they were like
I can't
big
remember.
partners.
Yeah.
Wyatt's in the 8th grade.
This summer, Alex and Boyd will move up into the group. That crew moves up.
See, I don't think about us.
And
Which
that,
is the rest of them?
well,
Which one's wrong?
Mackenzie,
You turn it off so it doesn't
Mackenzie,
run battery.
all the girls that went to DB, or went to church camp with me this year. Who else is that? Who else went?
The little blonde girl.
Little one.
Yeah,
I can sing.
Savannah, no, she's
Stephen
already.
Shelley's, I mean, not Shelley, Stephen
That's
Shelley's
what
little
Shelley
girl.
Cheese.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not thinking her name right now.
Did I tell you about my Shelley Cheese experience?
Oh my god.
Okay, let me get the camera fixed. I gotta straighten up the
I mean,
height.
I like know who it is, but like I can't think of her name. I don't. Yeah, but like in the time, I couldn't think of who it was because I mean,
Yeah.
going to that tea, I wasn't really worried about it. But I sit down and she goes, I heard her go, who's my neighbor? I had to stop there. I wasn't gonna answer. That's hilarious. A few seconds past, she goes, who's there? Who is it? And I was like, Elizabeth.
That's hilarious.
And she's like, oh, hi, girl, how are you? And I was like, good. Yeah, because I was like, I was so like, I just kind of need to take it back. By your stall neighbor speaking to you. And then she walked out, and I could kind of see like the glimpse of her, and then it like connected and everything. And I was like, oh, that's like.
Hey, Shelley.
She was our sub today.
Oh,
Was
my-
she?
I remember when I was in CCS, we would always tell she was a
She said all
sub
the
because
time.
you could smell it.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Yes.
The perfume lingers.
Why are you putting the mic there? Need my mic.
The perfume lingers. I love her. We share a birthday.
Oh, really?
We do.
When is
Me
your,
and
when is,
her, and Amanda, and Garrett. Russell.
so what birthday is
And
it?
Claudia.
April the 11th, and Claudia.
Are you Aries or not that?
Oh, what?
Aries.
I
what is that?
really have no idea. I don't
At least-
know anything about the.
I know nothing about that.
Okay, I know all the astrology signs, including some of the really hard ones to find. Gemini is really easy because you have two twins.
I just don't. I don't know.
I would like to read my horoscope for fun to see what.
I want to read my horoscope no matter what.
See what's gonna happen. I like it on BuzzFeed when they're like, pick a food or pick a food and it'll tell you what's gonna happen to you, and I'm like, ooh.
And I
This
do
is totally true. This has gotta be real.
Y'all, Lindsay?
Well, if it's April, it might be Aries or
Lindsay
Pisces.
believes- she- I said, Lindsay had a great
Just
day.
Donna.
No, I've never
Yeah, but you do, the twins,
What?
you and her. Joe's son.
Homeboy bought her a cow.
Mom, why she need a cow? Who's homeboy?
Nonsense.
He bought her a cow. That's not how I would like. What's her master doing,
I
right?
don't know what he is, but I'm gonna say Hans.
So yours part is
So,
no,
what was
from
her?
her.
Oh,
March
but she's
26th.
gonna have to
What would that?
Which one?
March 26th. Oh, that's my birthday. I don't know what that would be.
So you have two tries. One Aries is something. I'm trying to do some calculations here.
So now she really.
So what is your horoscope
Mine's
anyway?
a
I
Pisces.
forgot how that works.
Well, that's a
Is
really
it based off your
interesting one.
birthday?
I call them the second twins.
Yeah.
They're called the second
I haven't
twins
looked
because
into
they have
very
two
much.
fish,
Yes.
and there's.
Oh my gosh.
All right.
Scorpio.
I am five years old. That's one of the warnings I have.
It's shorter though. So it's fine.
Appreciate the chairs because I just put them in order.
Because I was like, I really hope, I mean, I think maybe that shows you how clumsy I am. Oh my god. Please don't say that in there. She's gonna. I was locking up.
You can hide behind the TV and sing. In the shadows. Alright, hey guys, let's go ahead and get started. Good to see everyone out here this fine afternoon. It is afternoon. Alright guys, hey, let's have, we're going to do prayer requests right off the bat here. And then we're going to have 2 songs. And we're going to jump back into Genesis, which I'm excited about. I have no idea how far we're going to get today, so we'll see how that goes. Any prayer requests? Anything we need to be praying about for you guys? Yes, sir?
Our friend is having heart surgery tomorrow.
Boy, I didn't get into that.
Our friend is having heart surgery tomorrow.
Your friend is having heart surgery tomorrow. All right, let's remember this. What's the name?
Paxton Case.
Paxton.
Paxton. Thank you. Okay.
Pray for the church and you and your family.
Yeah, let's do that. I'm cool with that. Yeah, we've got some big decisions coming up as a church in the next few weeks, months.
Whoever stole my grandmother's purse has cashed out a total of $5,900 so far.
That's not very nice at all.
And we think that they can find who it is because they've gone to multiple banks now,
Yeah.
but nobody's even trying to find them anymore.
Goodness gracious. Yeah, she doing all right? Recovery going well?
She's not like walking around.
Okay, that's good. It's a long recovery. Pretty good. Yes, sir.
Chris, I forgot his last name though, he was a basketball coach.
Okay.
I have a praise.
Okay.
Dad's, all his stuff was clear.
Yeah, he's like fine.
Yeah, he's like a 16-year-old mark.
Yeah, that's what he said. He said 17.
Oh, 17. Yeah,
17.
same thing.
17 is the number.
Get right.
Yeah, so, yeah, that's good. Arden's a 17-year-old. He's excited mostly because now he can ski.
Yes.
That was his big concern. He was like, oh, I just want to ski. And I was like, oh, okay. Priorities. Priorities. All right. Any other praises? Any other great things happening? All right.
Oh, yeah, Melanie Ladner, surgery will be today.
Yeah. That's good. To continue to pray for that situation as well. All right, let's have a prayer. Gracious God, we love you. I thank you for these students, their faithfulness to come and to be here tonight and to hear from your word in just a few moments, to sing praises to your name. God, we ask now for each of these prayer requests that were mentioned, for those who are sick, those who are depressed, those who have lost loved ones. God, we lift them up to you. We pray that you would heal, that you would comfort, and that you would put people around them to offer hope in difficult times. God, let us understand that this is a broken world. But you've put us here for the purpose of being a light in the darkness. And so stir us up to that end today. God, we pray that as we hear from your word, it would challenge us, and we would see the beauty of your plan unfolding in the book of Genesis. God, we pray for our church. We pray for big decisions that are on the horizon for First Baptist Church, for the advancement of the gospel. God, we just pray that your will would be so clear in each of these circumstances. And God, we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Let's stand, guys.
Free
Dear God, Lord, I thank you for this day. I thank you for letting us come here to learn more about you. Please guide us and let us speak the word and let us hear what you need us to hear, Lord. I love you in Christ's name I pray. Amen.
All right, you guys want to go ahead and turn to Genesis 21. We're going to pick up there in just a few moments. I do want to spend a little time talking a little bit about what's going on in me and Angela's life, and kind of what the future looks like if all things kind of go as planned. Before we open this up, I know not everyone was at church Sunday or Sunday night, and preached a sermon Sunday morning from Acts chapter 13. And the whole point of that sermon is that God's plan to save the world is the church. What we're learning in Genesis are the very beginnings of God's people. God's always had a people. From Adam and Eve through Abraham to Isaac, who we'll look at in just a little bit. And then we see that one day out of that people, Jesus comes and establishes an even greater people, the church. And from the moment of Jesus' ministry through today, the church is the plan to save the world. Period. Look, as ugly as the church is sometimes, right? There's probably some people in this church who have had a bad experience in a church somewhere, or church people, or something like that. The church has always been and always will be God's plan to reach the nations. And I believe that with everything inside of me. And so I had a friend come to me, and I want you to know, for the last 4 years, really maybe even longer than that, I have been praying that God would raise up somebody from this church, from our church, to plant a church. And when I first started, I was actually praying that they would plant a church somewhere in Arkansas that needed a church. And I really wanted it to be within just a couple hours so we could drive there and help a lot. Those were I sometimes have very specific prayers, just to let you know. And I think that's okay, to have very specific prayers and desires. But for years now, I have been praying that God would raise up someone from our church, that this church would send out to plant a church. I believe in Scripture we see the model for planting churches is what they call the multiplication model, which means this church, a functioning, healthy, thriving church, plants a church. And they come alongside that church, partner with that church till it's healthy. And then when it becomes healthy, then they start planting another church. All the while, the new healthy church begins to plant a church. And then those two churches are bringing along 2 new churches till they become healthy. And then those 4 churches go and plant 4 churches. And then those 8 churches go and plant 8 churches. And then 16, and then 32. And you see how this grows much faster if all these churches are multiplying. I've always believed that to be God's plan to reach the world. And the unreached people in the world. Let's put it this way, the fourth largest mission field in the world, let's say that, is the United States. Over 200 million people here have no profession of faith. And that's what we know of. There are many others who have what we call nominal Christianity, which is no Christianity at all. But over 200 million here in the States do not have a relationship with Jesus. This is a large mission field. And so I began to pray 4 years ago. God raised somebody up. And we've had some pretty amazing guys come through our college ministry and our student ministry that I thought maybe that's the guy. You guys know a lot of those, from Tyler Sikora to Aaron Warren to Zach Phillips and some of these guys that even you guys know. I thought, maybe God's raising up one of these guys. And while all of them are in ministry now and are doing great things for the Lord, Zach's pastoring a church up in Atkins, and Tyler's working on his doctorate now, and Aaron Warren just got done with a 2-year mission trip to Vietnam. He was in Vietnam for 2 years through the International Missions Board. I mean, just some amazing things have happened. God had not answered that prayer. My prayer was, God, raise us up a missionary out of this church. Well, about 6 months ago, it was actually maybe more like 8 months ago, it was in April of last year, a friend of mine, we were at the national meeting, just where we all come to talk associational stuff and figure out what we're going to do as BMA churches. A friend of mine came to me and said, we need a church planter, and we need one in Missouri. He's at a very small little rural church in Missouri, and there's about 45 churches in Missouri that are our association, Baptist like us. Now there are many other Southern Baptists. There's some great ministries going on in Missouri, but the churches that we're associated with, they haven't had a church plant in Missouri in over 20 years. It's been 20 years since they put a new church in Missouri. And so he starts sharing with me his thoughts, and I'm like, man, I know a couple guys. Let's call these guys. Let's talk to them. All the while, in my mind, God's calling someone else. Maybe my role is going to be to train them up and send them. I think most of the ministry that I've been able to do, both in Greenbrier and here, has been an equipping ministry. I'm not good at a lot of things, but I think the things that God has given me a passion to do are to preach, to teach, to disciple, and to train up young men for the ministry. We've sent out, I believe it was 13 the last time we counted, young men who have been somewhat attached to this church and these youth and college ministries over the last 11 years, out into missions, somewhere, some way, somehow. And my thoughts were always that I would be an equipper. I'd be sending somebody out. And about April, when this conversation started, I changed the question. I said, okay, God, there's a need out there. Can I fulfill that need? And the question was, really the answer was, we need a church planter. We need someone to come and tell people about Jesus who aren't hearing about Jesus. And the question that I began to ask was, okay, God, I'm not going to take anything off the table. Do you want me to go and do that? And know that this didn't come out of anything that had to do with this church. I've said it many, many times. I have the greatest job on earth. It's a job that was made for me. Okay? I have secretaries that take care of all the stuff I'm terrible at. And they're amazing at it. My job is to preach, teach, disciple, and train up young men specifically. And then I've got this woman here, my wife, who's also made for this job, who is amazing at discipling young ladies. This is what we do. I'm content. I love my job. So when I started asking that question, it was not without any kind of, I genuinely thought the answer would be, no, God, or Dustin, I'll provide somebody, you send them out. But I don't want to take anything off the table. And it's amazing how as I began to pray that, and as I began to have, share it with my wife and things like that, God began to shift my desires. Not away from what I'm doing now, but towards doing something different for the kingdom. You know, when a preacher surrenders to ministry, you know, that means that he says whatever. Jeremy Ambrose used to say, put your yes on the table, and God will put it on the map. And a lot of times we say, I'm going to find a place I like on the map, and then I'll work there if God wants me to. That's just not how this works. And so I began praying. I actually my friend called me back, and he said, Dustin, why don't you come plant a church up here? And I said, well, Brian, I've been talking about that. Me and my wife have been praying about that, and I would love to have a conversation with you and the other guys up there about what that might look like to come and plant a church. And always knowing this, no man can just decide to go plant a church. That's not how church planting works. Churches plant churches. Men don't plant churches. Churches plant churches. So all the while understanding this, and this is what our church is doing right now. Right now, our church is praying and fasting for 3 weeks. Now, the only time we're fasting is on Tuesdays at lunch, so don't get nervous. You can eat the rest of the times. But Tuesdays at lunch, or if Tuesdays don't work for you, another day of the week at lunch, our pastor has asked us to stop and to pray and to ask the question, do we want to plant a church in the United States? And if we do want to plant a church in the United States, and this is you guys, this is your prayer, God, do you want us to plant a church in the United States? And if so, is Missouri the place to do it? And if not, where should we plant a church? These are questions that we should be asking all the time. And if God decides to plant a church through First Baptist Church, and the church feels that they want to call me to do it, Sunday morning I volunteered to go and to plant a church for First Baptist Church. So right now, this is where we're at in the process. We're praying. God, is this your will? Is this what you want for our church? And if it is, then we're going to start making decisions about what the future looks like, what the next year looks like. Any kind of time frame right now is going to be something that's quite far out. Most of us have talked about if the church wants to plant, it would be January of 2020 before we would move on to the mission field, because there's training and recruiting and finding the exact location of the church and meeting with pastors up in that area to find out where the needs are and things like that. There's so much that goes into planting a church. So this is not something we're going to decide quickly, but that's where we're at in the process. And you guys are my people, all right? We do life together, okay? And so here's my request. I need you guys praying for me. I need you guys praying for the direction of this church and what God would be honored with. And I'll tell you this. If God somehow reveals to this church and to me that He wants me to stay here, I will absolutely be faithful to that. But if God tells me to go, I will be faithful to that as well. So right now we are in a season of seeking God's will for this church and this opportunity that we have to plant a church in Missouri. And somebody came and talked to us about this. This wasn't something that we sought out, but it really is a great opportunity if the church wants to plant a church. So that's where we're at in this process. Do you guys have any questions? Anybody have any questions about what this looks like? Or
I was about to say, is this church going to be able to hold itself before anything bad happens? Because during that process, things are going to happen.
yeah, during the planting process, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, how you're going to try to get it back? Because I've seen, I know a little bit about Missouri, but a little bit of their history. Yeah, they were founded before Arkansas, so our church is only about 107, close to 107 years old, this one right here, and you're gonna try to plan a new one. That's gonna be an interesting task, because you got to plan out all the,
Yeah,
what you're gonna have to do.
there's lots of plans that'll go into this, and that's. where
Connor
the
has a
church-
question.
That's where the church will come along and help with that. Yes, sir.
Let's say you decide to get,
Okay.
how will the process of finding a youth pastor?
That's a great question. Here's what I would love to do, okay? This is my plans. I don't know what the church will do, but here's what I would love to do. I would love to bring that person on in May and have them here for the summer so that they can spend time with you guys while I'm on trips with you guys too, because I'm hanging out with y'all all summer. You need to know that, okay? I would love for that person to come and go ahead and be on staff so that I can introduce them to you and introduce you to them. And I have some people that I really like, that you guys will love, and I want to pick the next person. Because there's some people that I don't like, and you won't like, and I would like to protect you from them. Yes?
Move for youth pastor 2021, question mark?
You know, here's the problem with that. We already have one Russell on staff, and I feel like we're at capacity. That's all the Russell that we could possibly have is there. So yeah.
So you're saying, we should be able to vote on the new youth pastor?
The church will all vote on the new youth pastor.
So we don't get to vote?
It'll be, are you part of the church? Are you part of the church? I'll tell you guys, because you guys, some of you were not, well, I think everybody was born. Some of you were one the last time we selected a youth pastor. All right? That was me. Yeah. I'll tell you how that process went, okay? Here's what they did. They brought me down. I spent a weekend down here. On Friday night, we had a big dinner. I hung out with all the youth kids, got to know them. On Saturday, we did a Q&A that night with all the parents and the youth kids together, and they asked me a billion questions, and we talked and hung out, played some games, I think, during that day. Matter of fact, I think we played wiffle ball. Somehow, some way, we worked wiffle ball into the youth pastor weekend. I dominated everyone in wiffle ball, and they wanted me to come to teach. That's really what it was, I think. And then I preached on Sunday, and hung out Sunday afternoon, met with deacons, met with pastoral staff all weekend, things like that, just to kind of get to know the culture. Then I left for the weekend. They waited a little while. They spent some time in prayer. They prayed about the decision. They looked at resumes, all that kind of stuff. And then the church decided to have me down in view of a call. So I came down and I preached again. And then the church called me that night. They voted and I accepted that next night. It would be something similar to that.
You have the college people come down here after we do, would the replacement be taking care of the college students too?
Mm-hmm. Probably. College is not really part of my job.
Yeah, I know, that's
Which
why I
is
was
funny.
thinking.
We started that, just a little Bible study on Wednesday nights. I had a few kids who graduated who were seniors. They graduated and they were like, what do we do now? And I was like, go to church. And they're like, we would like to do a Bible study. I said, ugh, I don't have another night of the week. I said, just come up after the youth kids and we'll meet. And there was like 5 or 6 of them. And that grew very rapidly over the next 2 or 3 years to where I think at our peak we had 1 week where we had 82 college kids in this room. And that whole semester we ran around 70. Now we had some really dynamic college leaders. Jordan and Tyler and Aaron and those guys were all there, man. They were bringing in students and so that really wasn't a ministry when I got here. We didn't have a college ministry when I got here. It started as a little Bible study and just kind of grew into what it is now. And so, I would assume that the next guy that comes in will be over that.
Would you have any say in pushing that for the time?
I hope to have a lot of say in all of these things, okay? I don't want someone to get in here and be silly. You know what I mean? I think, I want, look, everybody, you guys know I love to have a good time. But when we come in to worship the Lord, It's time to worship the Lord. And I want someone who takes the Word of God seriously. That's the very first thing. Someone who is way cooler than the last youth pastor, right? Huh?
The one that dropped out of
That'd be a
us a
problem.
few years ago, they
That
didn't,
would be a problem.
didn't,
So, anyway, yeah, next question.
So would we have to wait till the next one to come in to start plans for the youth center?
Actually, no, because the youth center is already underway. Not being built, but the deacons are meeting about that Sunday night. And don't worry, I got plans for the youth center. I would love to see it built before I go. So that's where I'm at.
So the bus barn would be like village?
Do what? It's not going to be the bus barn. Yeah.
the youth center's gonna be right
The
here.
bus barn won't be. That won't work. That building won't work. It wasn't built to hold people in. It was built for buses. So there's just codes and things that.
That's the reason why it's called bus.
All right. Yes, ma'am.
What about to do more Bible study? They take over that, or would
Here's the thing, okay? Someone else is going to come in and they are going to do some things different than I am, okay? They absolutely are. And here's what I will expect from you, all right? Don't be jerks. That's all I ask, okay? Look, you know, it's amazing to me how the younger generation always gets on to the older people in the church about not wanting to change things. But then you try to change something that they're doing and they're like, oh, no. Look, someone else is going to come in and they're going to have a different plan and philosophies and they're going to have some of those things, all right? It's going to be different. Now, the big picture will be the same. I believe that. The big picture will be the absolute same. You build a student ministry on preaching and teaching the word and discipling students, Bible study and prayer. Those are the things. Those are the essentials. Those are the questions that are the most important questions if we end up looking for a new youth pastor. All right? There will be input from you guys in the whole process. I remember there was a youth kid, Trevor Rogers was actually on the search committee that brought me here. So there was a student representative on the committee. That may be something that happens as well. I think there was a college age, just a little bit out of college age student on there as well. So that'll be it'll be an interesting process. And really, guys, that it's exciting. It's exciting to see God begin to do new things in our lives. But we're not at the point yet where you guys are shipping me away. Okay? Right now we're at the point of praying and saying, okay, God, is this really what you want? There's been a very cool opportunity set in front of us, but we have to ask the question, God, is this you? Or is this just something that we need to pass on and focus our efforts somewhere else? So that's where we're at in the process. We're praying. We're skipping one meal a week. We're praying during that time that we would normally be eating. And we're seeking God's plan for our lives. Yes?
Okay, so if they're gonna tear this down, where are we gonna have you?
Not right here. It's torn down.
We'll be in the main hall of the
Here's
sanctuary.
the deal, and none of you guys would remember this either. We actually had youth over in the bus barn for about a year and a half. And matter of fact, some of our biggest attendance weeks were over in that bus barn. And it was bonkers. It was absolutely bonkers. We had chairs everywhere. So, but yeah, we met there, so that's a possibility. On Wednesday nights, they don't use the fellowship hall other than to serve a meal beforehand for Awana. They actually don't use that gate floor. So there's a lot of options for that. They're all temporary solutions. But the building that we're looking at building is really cool.
I hope it's a 150 capacity.
If that building is built before I leave, I'm super gonna be mad. I'm so mad. So there will be no stairs. There will be no stairs. Why would you want stairs? What is the obsession with stairs? Okay. Any other questions before we do a 10-minute devotion? Hey, look, guys, and I I talked with Brother Brent some about talking to you guys first before I went to the church. And if we met on Saturday night, I would have. But since we met on Wednesday night, I really wanted to be able to share with the whole church as a whole, kind of what God's plans were. Yeah, because exactly.
Definitely not.
That's exactly right. I didn't trust you. Let's just be honest. You never talked about it.
Understandable.
So, but that's what's happening right now, and there's potential for the future. So there's a lot of questions are still up in the air right now. We'll keep you guys kind of posted as it goes, and always listening for insight as to what you think a good direction will be. So, all right, turn with me to Genesis 21. We're going to look at a short story here of God protecting Hagar and Ishmael. Okay, Hagar and Ishmael. That was Abraham's son. Ishmael was Abraham's son with Hagar. Hagar was the slave of Sarah. And in the very beginning, Isaac is born. And we have this really interesting interaction here. As soon as Isaac is born, they go ahead and throw this party for him that normally wouldn't have been thrown until he was like 2. And the reason was because a lot of children died at a very young age way back then. At least that's the guess. So they would wait to make sure this was a healthy child, and then by the age of about 2, they would throw this party. And so they're immediately having this party for Isaac. Why? Because God had promised Isaac. And so there was no reason to wait and see if this was going to be a healthy baby. This was the promised child of God. So they immediately throw this party, and some weird incident happens at the party. It says this in verse 8, and the child grew and was weaned, and Abram made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. So the 8th day. All right? But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. So, man, things have gotten heated in this thing. And it's over some, and the language here, of course, Hebrew is a tough language, okay? So this version translates it laughing. If anybody has something besides ESV, they may have something else in their translation. Playing with, he was playing with the son, or there's all different kinds of translations here. But something happened where Ishmael was interacting with Isaac when he was 8 days old, and Sarah just became enraged, furious at the thought of these two growing up together. She became jealous for her son. And immediately she goes to Abraham and makes the most unreasonable request. Abraham and Sarah were not reasonable people. Okay? Look, over and over and over again, we see in the story how unreasonable they are. Alright? So in this story, this is what happens. Okay? And so she goes to Abraham. And obviously, verse 11, because Abraham loves Ishmael. Alright? He does. This is his firstborn son. This is his child. It's not Sarah's child, it's his child. And he loves Ishmael. So this displeases him, as verse 11 says. It says, and the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son, Ishmael. But God said to Abraham, so Abraham goes to God. But God said to Abraham, be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. So this is an odd interaction with God. He goes to God, and God interjects because he doesn't want to send his son and Hagar, this slave, he doesn't want to send them off. He doesn't want to kill them. And Sarah would have probably been fine with that as well. So God interjects here, and he says, don't be displeased. Go ahead and do whatever Sarah says, because I have big plans for Isaac. I have big plans for Isaac. Isaac will be the promised one, just as he had already said a couple times in this text. So he says, you go ahead and you turn out, send away Hagar, the slave, and your son Ishmael. But then God made a promise. God made a promise with that. He says, because I'm going to make a great nation out of them. So Abraham has a decision to make, right? Is he going to obey, or is he going to believe the promise of God and obey God's command with his son Ishmael? Since God has told him you do whatever Sarah asks, Sarah has already made her request, you send them away. You get rid of them. Well, let's see what Abraham does in response. Verse 14, so Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. So here's what Abraham does in response to God's command. He believes God, and he does what God says. Now I want to paint this picture for you, though. Abraham takes his son, and there's all different guesses on how old he was by this time. We don't really have a good time frame for how old he is. Some think he was a toddler because of the incident that's going to happen a little bit later with the bush, and you'll see that in just a little bit. Some think he may have been very young at this time. Some think up to 8. Some say 17 years old because they're very confused. All right? But he was, in my opinion, probably somewhere between 4 and 10 years old, if you just want to give it a general. And he gathers Hagar and his son early in the morning. He takes them out, he points them towards the wilderness. He gives them a little water and a little bread and says, leave. What? That's just crazy, right? I mean, how is this story in the Bible? Why would God command something like this? I mean, how is it that we see the God of love asking him to do something that seems so very unloving? Well, we have to read the rest of the story to see why. All we know so far is that God has made a command. Abraham believed God, and so he obeys that command. Do you think he understood everything that was going to happen? Absolutely not. God didn't give him the rest of the story. This is going to come into play next week when we look at the story of Isaac as well. 2 times he has to make the decision to follow the promise or command of God and to believe what God says is true. So let's see what happens. Verse 15, when the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot. Now I think that's a very intentional phrase, about the distance of a bow shot. All right, so he puts this, and this would have been a really cool way to read Hebrew. Because later on, we're going to run into this Ishmael guy later in the story, and he is this rugged bowman. I mean, he emerges out of the wilderness to make this great kingdom of basically a warrior bowman. And so at the very beginning, there's already this foreshadowing of God's grace on Ishmael. When it says that she goes and she sets him down under the bush, because she doesn't want to watch her son die. She wants to be there, but she just can't bear this. So she sets him down under a tree, and she goes about a bow shot away. Let's keep reading. For she said, let me not look on the death of the child. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And then, how cool is this verse? Verse 17. And God heard the voice of the boy. Now, she is there, and she's weeping, and she's crying out, and even her screams and her cries didn't overshadow the voice of this young boy calling out to God. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, For God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. So you already see that God's hand is on this young boy, this Ishmael. He is receiving in this moment the promise that God had promised to Abraham that even through Ishmael, I'm going to make a great nation. I'm going to make a great nation. He's not part of the lineage that's going to lead to Jesus, but he is going to be blessed by man's standards. And you start to see this even immediately. And then he says, verse 18, Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. So God miraculously, there's a well. Now, I don't know if you know much about wells in the wilderness or the desert. They don't just appear. And it's interesting, you read the language. I mean, this is a miracle that happens. You know, you've all seen the movies where they're walking through the desert and they start hallucinating and they see the oasis. It'd be just like that, only then it's real. And that's exactly what happens. This oasis pops up, this well pops up in the middle of the desert and becomes life-giving for Hagar and her son. Now, if we just pause for a moment and think about that story. This life-giving well that pops up in complete and utter hopelessness. Do you see the gospel in that at all? And if so, how? I think every passage of Scripture should point us to the gospel. How do we see the gospel in a story like this? Jesus is the well. And the wilderness is our hopeless condition, right? I mean, all of us have, at some point in our life, found ourselves, either we are there now, or we were before we became Christians, without any hope of life. With no chance for eternity. But God has made a promise, and that promise is this, that all who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. And what happens? God hears the voice of the boy, and he offers life. That hasn't changed. So many years later, that hasn't changed at all. The story is still true today. That we are hopeless without the well. We are hopeless without the water of life. But Christ has made himself available to us even in the wilderness, even in our lost and broken condition. All we have to do is cry out to God. Say, God, forgive me of my sins and save me. And drink from the living water. And this theme of water is going to pop up in the rest of the law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. It's going to be a water. This is that from where the sacrifices are to they're going to be crossing some big rivers. They're going to be striking rocks. Water's going to fly out of those. And then you're going to see it's going to be in the Bible some more. But then when Jesus shows up, man, water becomes a big theme again. The water in the wilderness for the Israelites, and then the water in the wilderness for the rest of the world, Jesus Christ. We see that here with this story. We see the grace of God extended to Ishmael and Hagar with living water. And I pray that every one of you have tasted of the living water of Jesus Christ and have been saved. And if you haven't, here's the invitation. When everyone else leaves, you stay. share with you what God has done to save you, not from anything in this life, but to save you for all eternity. You can be with Him. You can be with those who love Him forever. Would you just say afterwards? So let's pray. Gracious God, we love you, and we see your grace in this passage. What a difficult passage. As this starts off, we may not understand the reason and the logic behind this. We don't understand. But God, as we see it unfold, we realize that Abraham's faithfulness played a part. But ultimately, the big story here is the well that appears and offers life to the dying. And so, God, I pray that you would cause each student in here to drink from the well of Jesus, to trust in Christ, to give their lives to Him, for Him to be their treasure and their joy. And if they are not, God, even now, show them their condition. Show them that they are in the wilderness and they need the living water. They need Christ. We ask this in Jesus' name. Trust me, she's been crying for like 6 months.
She's never having everybody cry.
She's a big cry. I don't know if you know this about my wife, but she's a big crier. She is. She has a very sweet and tender spirit about her. Do it. You're usually not?
A crier.
Yeah. I'm not. Never have been. Probably should be, though. Angela says I'm like the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. I don't have a heart. I don't think that's true. I think I have a sweetheart. But that's what I'm working on. It's the goal.
Wizard of Oz.
Just to find a wizard. I don't think it's actually a real one to begin. Let me just give him my
Let me get that out. That is the end of the live stream, everyone. I know that this thing was in the way again, but I can't help it. It's not my fault that this thing was in the way. It's because the church put it up there. But anyway, I hope you guys have another good time for this episode. By the way, guys, I'm going to tell you guys some updates on some stuff real quick. Angel, on this part of this year, my parents and me are going to be moving up North Arkansas. I'm not going to give you a specific location until further notice. I'll be moving to a special college because of my disability and my kind of lack of knowledge when you would set that date. I'll be giving you guys some updates on what's coming up this next month. Something you guys might have noticed, you didn't know that I'm really busy with some stuff for a convention coming up. I'm going back to Dallas again this February, on the first week of February, on the 8th through the 10th, I'll be leaving for Dallas. A 3-hour trip from here to my house. Undisclosed location, not going to tell you where specifically. And what it is that I'm going to be not, when it gets close to July, I won't have much of any footage from this season. So after seasons 3 is over with Dive, I do not know what else I'm going to do with my show because this is not my show. This is the church's little series I've put up together, and I've done this for 3 seasons already. And I feel kind of sad that this is going to not be my last, but I do not know what I'm going to do for the next 4 years. It'd be my 5th season if I did this already for 5 years until I had college. So, well, turn that off. What I'm going to do my best. I'm going to try my best to upload as much footage from this past year if I can. If I can't live stream, if I can't get my stuff to work, if I can't get any footage worked on my stuff, it is not my fault. The computer can act up on me anytime I upload something. It is not my fault. If the footage gets corrupted, it is because the output and input are both acting stupid. So if anything goes wrong in my live stream, even right now, I'm this close from the camera, about almost 10 feet away, 8 foot, I don't know how far, but it feels like almost 20 feet from here to the speaker. I'm going to try my best, and I'm repeating, I would try my best to upload, record, and do everything I can to upload my series. I have a lot of videos that are unlisted on my channel, that when it gets too close to moving, I'm going to try my best to not panic. If I'm going to be moving somewhere else that is not, I know, very long, not more than about a couple of months, I'm sorry to say that if I can't handle the pressure up at Bentonville Rogers, that's in a very disclosed area, just saying, because that's where I'm going area, I disclose, I'm going to try my best to record my trip up there. My trips, I'm going back in April of this year for my final year going to film festival, film camp, whatever. I'm going to try to do my best. My best. I am not giving up on my career in doing this stuff. I love recording stuff. I love making videos. I love making vlogs. I like making this and that. I am not quitting for what I have made. My channel has been up for over 10 years, and I'm not going to allow it to slip. This July 23rd of this year will count 10 years since I've been on YouTube. So if you guys are going to see me again in July, you better hope so, because I'm here all year long until I feel like I want to quit. But you know what, YouTube? I am not quitting. I am determined to keep going on my trip. I'm determined to get my goals set up. I'm not going to tell you my goals because that is undisclosed information. If you want to know about what I do or whatever, I know I have an email for something that's not always related, but it's something I recorded. I can draw something. I can draw sketches. Okay, I can do art all the time I want. I'm doing clay stuff now. So if you want to know something I'm doing this week and the next and the next and the next, I am doing clay pottery. We're making pots. We're making this and that. And it's not my fault if I have to do it. My teachers will get upset if I do not do anything for them. Or anything. I'm going to finish up my last year at school. I'm going to college. I'm getting that degree, so I don't have to suffer with being an entrepreneur with no accessibility to what information I have to get for the next few years. And oh boy, people want to complain that you do not need this and that. You know what I don't? I don't give a crap about what you say. Your opinions are only just a few things from an entrepreneur who only does certain one thing and doesn't give a whole lot. I know this formula on a board doesn't solve anything. The majority of the formulas will be like, okay, eliminate this, eliminate that, eliminate this. No! Do not ever do that. It's an extremely hard thing to do, to not ever quit. I have passions. I have dreams. I have a career I want to do. I am not giving up my life to some pity-witty, whatever case, minimum wage job that only pays half of what I can get. I know what I want. I don't want a minimum wage job. I don't want to get paid little. You know, I don't like the idea of getting paid at all little. I deserve more because, in a way, for me, I have suffered a lot. Not a mental disability. I suffered through money trouble with my mom and dad. I'm just saying that suffered, but I have problems with people. Like, for a long time, for over 12 years, I had to suffer through, bankruptcy. For once, back in 2007 and 09, I had to suffer very little, and that wasn't my fault. The banks and whatever, we couldn't afford that. That is not my fault. And I'm giving you a little bit of a motivation thing right here. I am repeating myself. I'm determined to do whatever I can to live as long as possible without people getting in my way. I like people as friends, families, whatever. In my case, God has given me a chance to do something more than I can. I have choices. God gives us all the freedom we can. And you know what? There's some people who are so ignorant. There is a point and a limit where people can be so ignorant it's unbearable. And it's not my fault either. But you know what? I should stop talking right now and get my freaking bags all set up, and I can get back to you guys some other time. So, good night.